Welcome to this lecture on the cardiorespiratory system during exercise. The average human needs about 360 litres of oxygen a day just to survive. If we want to start moving around and exercising, this increases dramatically. So ensuring that the body and its vital organs get enough oxygen is absolutely paramount to human survival. For example, if the brain is deprived of oxygen for just 3 minutes, the cells begin to die, which can cause permanent damage or even death. But let's take a step back. What is it about oxygen that makes it so vital for humans? Well, the simple answer is that the body needs fuel to keep it going. And the primary fuel source that our bodies use is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. In order to convert the food and the nutrients that we eat into ATP, our body has to use oxygen. You also need to remember that as a result of using this oxygen, our bodies also produce carbon dioxide as a waste product, and that too much carbon dioxide accumulation can also be lethal, so we need to get rid of that. The oxygen that we use comes from the air that we breathe, but there are a lot of steps for our bodies need to go through to get the air into our lungs and then into the organs where we're actually going to utilize it. So this lecture series will explore how the various body systems work together to bring this oxygen from the air into our bodies, and then how we circulate this oxygen to the bodies, to the vital organs, and also remove the toxic waste products such as that carbon dioxide. So we need a way to be able to bring this oxygen into our bodies and also to get rid of the toxic carbon dioxide. And this is the function of the cardiorespiratory system. This system includes the lungs, which are responsible for the transfer of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the atmosphere and the body. Once in the body, the oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream, and the blood, which is now rich in oxygen, is transported through the body to the organs via the blood vessels, or more specifically, the arteries. Once the body has extracted the oxygen that it needs, the deoxygenated blood, or the blood which now no longer carries the oxygen, along with the carbon dioxide, returns to the lungs via the veins so that it can be blown out of the body back into the environment while we breathe. The final major component of the cardiorespiratory system is the heart, which is responsible for pumping the blood all around the body. In this way, the blood is able to move from the lungs where it picks up the oxygen, and then attaching that oxygen as it moves itself through the body, it then delivers that oxygen to the tissues where the oxygen is used. Remember, using oxygen also produces waste products, including carbon dioxide, and the movement of the blood takes this carbon dioxide and takes it away from where it's produced at the muscles and the organs. The heart also pumps blood to the lungs, which is where it picks up the new stores of oxygen, so that the cycle of delivering this oxygen-rich blood to the body can keep going. The ventilatory system is responsible for bringing the air in and out of our lungs. While we are quietly resting, we're breathing about 4 to 6 litres of air per minute. That's about the same amount that's in a basketball. But if we want to get to our maximal capacity during exercise, this has to increase to about 150 litres every minute. But the lungs are only one part of the ventilatory system. Air gets brought into the body while we breathe, which starts at either the nose or the mouth, or both. It then travels down to the back of your throat and into your trachea, or the windpipe. Your trachea then divides into air passages called bronchial tubes. And as the bronchial tubes pass through the lungs, they divide into smaller air passages, which are called bronchioles. And the bronchioles keep dividing and getting smaller and smaller until they finally terminate in these tiny balloon-like air-filled sacs called alveoli. Your body has over 300 million alveoli, and each one is a small membranous sac about the same diameter as the thickness of one cell. As you can see in this diagram here on your top right-hand corner, the alveoli are surrounded by a mesh of very, very fine blood vessels called capillaries. That means that the capillaries and the alveoli lie side by side with only one cell on each, dividing the air on one side and the blood on the other. So it just needs to pass the thickness of about 2 cells. So therefore the oxygen which is inhaled passes very quickly and efficiently through the alveoli walls and into the bloodstream. And because these walls are so thin And because there are so many of them in our bodies, the exchange of oxygen from the lungs into the blood system is very quick and efficient. At rest, this means that a single red blood cell passes about 2 or 3 alveoli every second as it transits. But when you're at your maximum exercise, in that same 1 second, probably 1 pint or half a litre of blood flows through the lung tissues into the blood vessels. Another important part of the cardiorespiratory system for transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide between the environment and the organs is the blood. Although at first not so obvious, the blood is actually vital to this process because it is the vehicle that transports the oxygen from the lungs and takes it to the organs, and also through the blood we can remove that carbon dioxide from the organs and take it back to the lungs. So while simple in theory, there is a major limitation that we have to overcome, and that is that oxygen is not very soluble in blood, or more specifically, the plasma. At the level of the alveoli, there is a small amount of oxygen which is forced into the blood because of a difference in pressure gradient. So, at the alveoli, about 3 mils of oxygen per litre of blood is pushed into the blood concentration per minute. Considering that the average volume of blood of a person is about 5 litres, this gives us about 15 mils of oxygen per minute. However, the minimum amount of oxygen that we need just to sustain our human lives at rest is 350 mils per minute, which means that if we rely only on the oxygen which is carried inside of the blood, then we would have enough oxygen to sustain our life for about 4 seconds. Or we would need 80 litres of blood circulating our body per minute just to meet our basic resting demands. Luckily for us, only a fraction of the oxygen, or 2% of all of the oxygen which is in our blood, is actually dissolved within the plasma. The rest of the oxygen is carried by being bound to the hemoglobin and carried around the body by the red blood cells. Within the blood, each red blood cell contains about 280 million hemoglobin molecules, which accounts for about 95% of the entire red blood cell. Each hemoglobin molecule consists of an ion or a heme particle and also a protein, which is a globin. The ion atom acts as a magnet to the oxygen molecule, attracting and holding it very firmly. Through the action of this hemoglobin, each red blood cell can therefore carry about 1 billion oxygen molecules. That's way more than enough to sustain our life. So now that the oxygen has made its way into the bloodstream, it somehow needs to be pumped around the body, and this is the role of the heart. So the heart muscle is the hardest working muscle in our body. Each day it pumps about 8,000 litres of blood. The heart pumps blood to almost every single one of the body's 75 trillion cells. It is only the corneas that don't receive a blood supply. The average adult heart weighs around half a kilo, and it beats a staggering 40 million beats per year. The heart is made up of 4 chambers that you can see working together in this MR image of the beating heart. As the blood enters into the heart, it goes into the top, either the right or the left atrium, which are the receiving chambers. The receiving chambers then both squeeze together, pushing the blood down into the main chamber of the heart, or the ventricle. Now there is a left and a right ventricle as well. These chambers pump together, making sure that the blood is synchronized as it comes through the heart and back out into the lungs or into the body. Separating the atria from the ventricles are one-way valves. These open up, allowing the blood to flow through, and then quickly close off, making sure the blood doesn't go in the wrong way so that it keeps constantly going through this circuit. Well, now you might be wondering, if the atria contract and relax together, and the ventricles work in tandem as well, why do there need to be 2 of each? So this is because there are actually 2 separate circulations within the heart. On the right side of the heart, we have a pump which is called the pulmonary circulation, that is responsible for moving the blood to and from the heart and to the lungs. And then on the left side of the heart, there is a separate circuit, the systemic circulation, which is responsible for pumping the blood from the heart into the rest of our body. So these two circulations work together to ensure that as the blood moves around the body, it is able to deliver and then replenish its oxygen stores. Let's have a look at that in a little more detail. We're going to start looking at the journey of a single red blood cell here at the muscle. This muscle, in order to contract, needs to produce ATP, and as you will remember, that requires oxygen. So where's that oxygen coming from? Surrounding that active muscle are lots of tiny capillaries. Remember those very small blood vessels. And they are all carrying red blood cells, which have, attached to the hemoglobin, heaps of oxygen. So the oxygen is then attracted from the red blood cell and enters into the muscle. This leaves the blood cell deplete of any oxygen or deoxygenated. And that is here depicted as a blue blood cell. So this blue or deoxygenated blood cell then travels back into those capillaries that surround the muscle and gets gathered up into the veins and eventually makes its way back up to the vena cava, which then enters the blood into the right atrium of the heart. Once the right atrium is filled with blood, it starts to contract and pushes that blood into the right ventricle. Again, once that right ventricle is full, it then contracts again and the blood is forced out into the lungs. We've already covered that at the level of the capillaries surrounding the alveoli, the deoxygenated blood cells are in such close proximity to the inhaled air, and therefore the red blood cells load up very quickly with the oxygen, so it's now ready to transport this oxygen to the rest of the body. But first it needs to be pumped to that body. So the now oxygenated blood, which is now red here, leaves the lungs and returns to the heart via the left atrium here at the top, so that it can then be ready to be pumped into the body. Just like we've seen on the right side, once the left atrium is full, it contracts, allowing the blood to flow into the left ventricle. And then once full, the left ventricle squeezes the blood out through the aorta and into the body. In this case, the blood cell makes its way through the arteries back to the capillaries which is surrounding that active muscle, which uses the oxygen, and the cycle continues. So before we finish, there is one more question that we need to explore. That is, how does the muscle extract the oxygen from the bloodstream? To answer this, you need to know that gases move from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. The difference in pressure between two areas is what we refer to as the partial pressure of that gas. So in the arteries of the body, which you remember carries the oxygenated blood,
there is a lot of oxygen carried in the hemoglobin and also a little bit that's carried in the plasma. So there's a high pressure of oxygen, which is about 100 millimeters of mercury. At rest within the muscle, there is only a smaller store of oxygen, which is about 40 millimeters of mercury. So obviously this is less than the pressure that's inside of the arteries, creating a partial pressure difference of about 60 millimeters of mercury, which then just drives that oxygen straight from the higher pressure of the artery into the muscles. It's absolutely remarkable to think how exquisite the human body is, because this is the same basic principle that also drives the oxygen from the air into our lungs, and then from the lungs into the alveoli and all the way through the system and keeps it going.